Hello and welcome to Host Planet Bitesize, the podcast brought to you by Host Planet and Hostfully. My name's James Varley, the founder of Host Planet, and our goal is to share everything you need to know about buying and managing short-term rentals. Today's guest is Charlie Gibbons from Beyond, and he's got 5 tips to share on how to keep your calendar full during shoulder season. Okay, real talk now for all you hosts out there. You know that moment when your guest messages you again with, "Hey, what's the Wi-Fi code?" Or you're staring at 5 different calendars, wondering if you've accidentally double booked the cottage. Yes, we've all been there. That's why here at Host Planet, we recommend Hostfully. It's basically your rentals control center. It handles bookings across all the big platforms, syncs your calendars to ensure there are no double bookings, automates guest messages, and even creates these really slick digital guidebooks that stop all the repeat questions. Honestly, it just makes your life easier and keeps your guests happier, helping you achieve those all-important 5-star reviews. And here is a little bonus. If you're a Host Planet listener, you can get $500 off onboarding for Hostfully's property management software and 30% off digital guidebooks for life. Just hit the link in the show notes and use the codes PLANET500 for the PMS and Host Planet GB for the guidebooks. And if you'd like a proper walkthrough, there's also a link to book a demo with Frank Bosey from Hostfully. He will show you how it all works. Less stress, more bookings, sorted with Hostfully. Charlie, thank you for joining us on Host Planet Bitesize. You've got 5 tips to share on how to keep your calendar full during shoulder season. So take it away with tip number 1.
Thanks very much for having me, James. It goes without saying, obviously things change during high to low season, and the shoulder is always an important opportunity to maximize. I suppose my first tip is booking lead times matter. They are changing now more than ever. That's not just in the UK, that's truly across the globe. It's rare to find a market where the booking lead time is at least getting longer. So as these things become more compact, my first advice again is pay attention to the booking lead time and keep pace with the evolving trends and price accordingly. Especially in shoulder season, demand isn't just thinner. Guest behavior is less predictable too, and really more opportunistic. So I know the compulsion can be to lower rates far out in advance, help you build occupancy. But wait until you're inside the booking lead time before you start getting really dynamic, or maybe fair to say in some cases aggressive. If you have the right strategy in place and your pricing is reflective of the experience you're offering with your listing, you'll capture bookings outside the window, as well as capturing those last minute, let's say, opportunists as well. So in short, be looking at both sides of the coin, especially in terms of pacing, what's happening inside your booking window and what's happening outside of it. That's my first one.
How important is it to hold your nerve, especially if you're in a market like mine where you get a lot of last minute bookings? I mean, how important is it not to tank the rate too quickly?
It couldn't be more important, but I suppose what should be your first question is how much occupancy and bookings have I built outside of my booking window? That should really dictate, let's say, how dynamic you want to get within the booking window itself. I think it's important that you look at 2 different things though. When you're looking at booking lead time, see how it's pacing compared to same time last year at your portfolio level. Are you in line? I'm sure you remember last year vividly. Are you above, right? Are you behind? But also be paying attention to how that's changing within the market as well. I think especially if you're finding that your bookings are more last minute than the market is, especially nowadays versus same time last year, that could tell you a little bit about what you wanted to do or what you should do with your rates further out, but also vice versa, right? If you're pacing far ahead the market, and that's true both outside and within the booking lead time, potentially there's an opportunity there. Maybe you're being a little bit too aggressive, a little too soon.
So booking lead times matter. What's tip number 2?
So it goes without saying again, right? Revenue is always the goal. But also the definition of success and rules shouldn't be the same throughout the year. It should change seasonally, right? But go deeper, even within the same season, especially during shoulder. Differentiate between your weekend and your weekdays in particular. Midweek demand, it isn't just softer. It books a lot more last minute. While you expect to see weekends, they remain kind of consistently strong and book further out in advance, at least in my experience, right, across many markets. So for midweek, be as flexible as possible with your rules, especially as it relates to min stays, and especially dynamic with your rates. And that's certainly true when you're within the booking window, within, the average booking lead time. Long story short, there are simply less eyes on those dates. So do everything that you can to make yourself stand out. For weekends, hold higher minimums, but also only consider adjusting rates further out, earlier, let's say, than later, if pacing again really shows clear signs of slowing versus same time last year. But again, look at that at a listing level, look at that at a portfolio level, especially within the same market, and look at that at a market level as well. Revenue gain, in my experience, especially if you're pricing dynamically, it comes from keeping pace. So when you're pricing dynamically, again, if you see that there's a divergence, it says something about your pricing. So split, let's say, the problem into two sides, especially during shoulder. Look at the weekends, look at the weekdays, treat them differently, apply different mins, and really, again, apply different rules from a min stay perspective if you can.
What would you say to a host or property manager out there and they're thinking, oh gosh, I can't go below a 3 or a 4 day minimum, but I want to get more eyeballs on my listing? Where would you start in that scenario?
So I'd firstly start by seeing how that's changed in the market, right? Get access to the data. There are many tools out there that can inform you and see how that's changed. Especially if you're an operator working on the behalf of owners, I think sometimes the proof is in the pudding. You just need to show them how these things are changing. Likewise, if you're a host, right, you're an operator yourself, this data isn't, in any way inaccessible. So have a look at, let's say, your preconceptions or maybe your traditional rules and compare them and see how much the market has changed. The reality is now more than ever, guest behavior has changed too. People are looking for flexibility. So while I can understand why, many operators, many owners out there might want to hold fast, they've seen the best results from these sorts of min stays in the past. It doesn't mean to say that you can't get as much out of it, if not more, ideally, by being more flexible. Because again, it's all about eyes on your listing. If you're more flexible, you're appealing to more people. But, don't just do it without thought or reason. Look at the data, see what it tells you first.
Makes a lot of sense. Tip number 3 then, Charlie.
Okay, so metrics, right? I always say this out loud. How you measure success, it changes. It can be a difference from an owner's perspective. It can be very closely related to the goals that they have with that particular property. And we always talk about occupancy. We always talk about ADR, especially during high season. But what matters most, in my opinion, is profitability at the end of the day. So if you're not already, make sure that you're playing your cards by REVPAN. Now, likely many people have heard that before. Sometimes it's referred to as REVPAR. But REVPAN stands for revenue per available night. And in my opinion, it's certainly the most important metric, especially during shoulder season. So I'm no mathematician, but just to kind of break it down, it's effectively taking the total revenue that you've generated in a particular period and dividing it by the number of available nights you have. So removing things like any owner stays, maintenance blocks, calendar blocks, and effectively it will tell you how much you're really making per night. So, for lack of a better word, it blends fill rate as well as the booked ADR. What I encourage people to do here is not just use it as a metric, but run tests throughout the period to see which one most positively impacts your REVPAN. Because again, that's the money you're making per night at the end of the day. You'd be really surprised. We always talk about this. Imagine a 30-day month, right? Would you rather have 50% occupancy during shoulder at £200 a night, or potentially 70% occupancy during the same period at £150 per night? The math often surprises operators and ultimately their owners. And the way to prove whether or not you should be leaning one way or another is, at the end of the day, the REVPAN. How much money are you actually making per night?
And this boils down to actually knowing your numbers, right? And I
Correct.
don't know. I just get a feeling that there are some hosts and property managers out there, and they see, what they think they should be charging. They look at competitors and think, okay, I'll charge that per night. That's my, I don't know, my base price or my minimum. But they haven't actually looked at what that will bring in terms of profit. And I get the impression that sometimes
100%.
people are making a loss. So, how important is it to really know your numbers and understand exactly how much you're making per night, per stay?
Well, it's critical, especially during periods where demand is a bit thinner. I suppose, there are so many different examples, and this changes across the globe massively. And, I appreciate also, what should be the case is when it comes to the restrictions you put in place, they should be absolute restrictions. And again, during shoulder season, they should be at the lowest low they can be in order to give you more dynamism in terms of what you can play with your rates. I know operators in markets like Dubai who, during their especially challenging low season, are comfortable making a loss and set their minimums accordingly. Because the idea is, you'd rather 80% of something than 100% of nothing at the end of the day. I suppose it all correlates back to what's the goals that you're setting with your property. Simply what's their revenue goal at the end of the day for the end of the year, but also what are you trying to achieve with this listing, and how are you, let's say, reflecting that within how you're pricing the listing. But knowing your numbers is critical. Setting minimums not based on, and I've seen this happen a lot, setting minimums based on what people determine as ideal rather than cost, for example, is something that happens too much. And, again, if these are things that you haven't changed year over year, you should always be calculating, how much is it actually costing me to offer this over a nightly period? And am I reflecting that in the rule sets and effective systems that you're using to build these strategies within? It's critical.
Yeah, it's a good point, isn't it, regarding the really seasonal markets, places like Dubai, where they'll have seasons where that's basically where they make all their money, and the rest of the year
Precisely.
it's a bit of a bonus what they get in. So and it's fine to look at it like that. Okay then, Charlie, tip number 4.
So, look, this is something I'll always say that operators know better than I, right? But play to your strengths in regards to guest personas. Think about the sorts of people, groups, let's say demographics that are coming to your market, especially during shoulder season, and leverage and build packages, banner discounts that appeal to these types of people and groups, because that's how you're going to be able to appeal again to the most eyes when it comes to booking a stay within your market and potentially booking your listing. I always think of obvious examples, especially in the UK, outside of summer, you're looking at more empty nest couples, off-peak families, as well as remote workers, right? That's becoming more and more of a demographic, I would say, in our industry now more than ever, outside of major holidays. Think about, 3-night romantic getaways and how you're marketing that, whether it's through a banner on the online travel agency, whether it's through a marketing discount that you're throwing out. And again, make sure that, you're effectively orientating your listing towards that sort of demographic. Don't be afraid to discount if people are booking longer length of stay. The one I always come back to is 4 nights, let's say, for non-peak families. People will book, right? If you're making it competitive, and you're offering discounts up front, maybe a kids go free kicker, right, on those larger berths too. And when it comes to remote workers, think about 7-night discounts, right? Which might appeal to them, especially if they're looking for, work away weeks in an idyllic location where they can get a bit more peace and quiet. But yeah, again, it's all about leveraging this so you can stay competitive and avoid fire selling at the end of the day.
Yeah, it boils down to knowing your target guest and then creating deals accordingly and then going to where they're hanging out, if it's the newsletter, social media, or wherever it might be. All right then, Charlie. So final one, tip number 5.
So, I think this is more important than ever before. But whatever you're doing, right, leverage strategies that evolve as your market does. Okay. So whether it's these last minute discounts, even far out premiums, right? When we're not talking about shoulder, have strategies in place that automatically change as your market does. Geared towards, of course, right? What are the objectives? So whether you want to be rate focused far out, whether you want to be, kind of optimally blended for revenue, or maybe if you want to lean into occupancy, there are tools out there that effectively automates these things based on how your market's evolving, based on how the booking lead time is evolving as well. You should always, where possible, have things in place that make it easy for you to monitor, let's say, output pace in terms of bookings and make tweaks, right? Not perpetually managing manual input of settings and rates, of course. Minimum stays are always a really important factor, again, especially when we're talking about shoulder season. When you're getting within your booking window, do you want to leverage a system that automatically drops minimum stays and accordingly increases flexibility? You can also have those things in place while ignoring those sorts of systems for key dates like major holidays. Christmas is a really obvious one. Thanksgiving is another one for those North American listeners. But my advice there is really plan for the future, not all the time. If that makes sense. The analogy I like to use is any operator, revenue manager, pricing manager, really anybody who's responsible for these strategies. Think of your role as a conductor. Effectively, the conductor leads the orchestra. You shouldn't be playing every single instrument at the same time as well, because in the end, you're just splitting yourself across too many aspects that ultimately lead to those small things that make all the difference being overlooked during the time where they matter most. But again, don't just price based on how demand changes in the market. Look at how your listing is pacing relative to similar bedroom sizes in the market too. As we said, REVPAN's important. Pacing changes, right, depending on your bedroom size, even within the same market. But again, there are tools out there that don't just help you price dynamically based on demand. They'll also help you affect that pricing based on how your listing is pacing relative to the market as well. I always promise you, James, no plugs, but I have to say it. In Beyond, we call that feature dynamic occupancy-based pricing. And, now more than ever, people are using it to be able to get the most out of their listings and really help them price accordingly when they're pacing, whether it's, based on occupancy or something else versus the market starts to become more and more divergent from, let's say that sweet spot.
Absolutely. And Beyond can help you to be the conductor and to play all the right notes in the right order. If people want to find out more about Beyond, Charlie, where should they go?
Check out our website. We have revenue consultants available. They're accessible through the website to offer you free consultations. Feel free to reach out to me personally. I have the pleasure of being the sales director for North America, the UK, Australia, and New Zealand. So I never sleep. But never hesitate to reach out to me if you'd like to know a bit more or you'd like to have a free consultation, both accessible via the website as well as myself.
Superb. We'll put all those links in the show notes as well as the link to your LinkedIn. Charlie, it's been a pleasure as ever. Thanks for joining us on Host Planet Bitesize.
Thanks for having me, James. Have a great week.
All right, that's it for today's episode. My thanks to Charlie for joining us and sharing those essential tips. Remember, this podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Hostfully, which is trusted by short-term rental professionals across the globe. As a Host Planet listener, you get 2 exclusive offers. $500 off onboarding for Hostfully's property management software. Just use the code PLANET500 and 30% off digital guidebooks for life. Use the code HostPlanetGB. To grab these deals, click the link in the show notes or head to hostfully.com. For more free education, tips and trends from the STR industry, visit hostplanet.club, where you can sign up for our newsletter, listen to our podcasts, and download a suite of ebooks for hosts and property managers. That's it for today's episode. Until next time, happy hosting.